I'm 28, a software engineer, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the absolute ghost of the family. My older sister, Vanessa, 30, is the golden child. My parents are deeply traditional, profoundly status-obsessed people, and Vanessa has always been their crown jewel. If Vanessa got an A-, it was a family celebration. If I won a state programming competition, it was, "That's nice, dear. Can you pass the salt?" The neglect isn't just passive, it's practically an art form. When I graduated from college, my parents literally forgot to show up. Why? Because Vanessa was having a minor emotional crisis over her college boyfriend of 3 months breaking up with her. They stayed home to comfort her, leaving me to sit through a 3-hour commencement ceremony entirely alone. My text thread with my parents is basically a graveyard. They never ask about my life, my job, or if I'm even dating anyone. Meanwhile, the family group chat is a nonstop highlight reel of Vanessa's life. If Vanessa gets a minor promotion or her husband buys a new car, my mom posts 30 emojis and type paragraphs praising them. I'm just the background noise. But here is what they didn't know. 5 years ago, I took a massive gamble. I joined an early-stage AI/fintech startup as one of its first employees. The base salary was terrible, barely enough to cover rent and ramen, but I negotiated a massive chunk of equity. I pulled 80-hour work weeks, burned the candle at both ends, and built their primary data infrastructure from scratch. 6 months ago, the gamble paid off in a way I still can't fully process. A massive, global tech conglomerate quietly acquired our startup. My shares fully vested and were liquidated. After the dust settled, taxes were paid, and my wealth management team structured everything. I was looking at my bank account in absolute shock. I am sitting on exactly $160 million in liquid assets and diversified investments. I didn't change a thing about my lifestyle. I bought a nice, comfortable, but entirely unassuming condo. I still drive my reliable hybrid. I didn't tell a soul in my family. Honestly, part of me wanted to see if they would ever notice me for me. I wanted to see if, just once, they would ask how I was doing without a $sign attached to my name. They didn't. Fast forward to yesterday. I only drove up for Thanksgiving dinner out of a lingering, desperate sense of familial obligation. I walked through the front door, and my mom gave me a generic, completely detached, "Oh, you made it. Hang your coat up." Within 2 minutes, I was entirely sidelined. Vanessa and her husband, Greg, were holding court at the dinner table. They were doing that insufferable thing where they loudly complain about the housing market while simultaneously bragging about how exclusive their lives are. They just bought a new $1.2 million home and spent the first half of dinner subtly hinting that my parents should help them out with their ballooning interest rates. Then came the disrespect. My dad wiped his mouth with his napkin, looked across the table at me with a condescending sigh, and said, "It's a shame you're still renting that cramped little apartment, OP. But hey, don't feel bad. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate ladder like Greg here. Some people just have simpler paths." Vanessa offered a nasty, knowing little smirk from across the table, leaning into Greg's shoulder. The room felt hot. Something inside me, after a decade of being shoved into the dark, just snapped. I reached out, grabbed the gravy boat, and poured it onto my mashed potatoes. Then, in the most casual, conversational tone I could possibly muster, I looked up and said, "Oh, renting is just easier for now. My wealth managers are still finishing up the restructuring of the $160 million payout from my company's acquisition last spring. Property taxes on the estates I'm looking at are just such a pain, you know? I'm taking my time." The room went dead, suffocatingly silent. The visual will be burned into my brain until the day I die. Vanessa's jaw literally dropped open. A half-chewed piece of turkey almost fell out of her mouth as she stared at me. My dad froze mid-pour with his wine glass, his hands visibly shaking as he stared blankly at me in absolute, stunned silence. My mom completely stopped chewing, her fork hovering 2 inches from her face. No one blinked. No one breathed. I took a slow sip of my water, smiled politely at my frozen family, and broke the silence. Anyway, could anyone pass the rolls? I left right after dessert because the tension in that house was thick enough to cut with a knife. My phone has been vibrating off the hook since I got into my car. So, Reddit, I'm sitting in my condo writing this. AIDA for dropping this on them at dinner? Update. Wow, this blew up. Thanks for the advice, everyone. A lot of you called me an asshole for flexing at the dinner table like that, but most of you said they absolutely deserved it. To answer the most popular question, no, they didn't think I was joking. The absolute terror and panic in their eyes proved they knew I was telling the truth. Here is what happened next. Within 20 minutes of driving away from my parents' house on Thanksgiving night, my phone began vibrating nonstop. It didn't just buzz, it practically danced across my passenger seat. I had to pull over into a gas station parking lot just to look at it because the notifications were a blinding blur. To give you some perspective, my text threads with my family over the last 5 years have been a literal desert. It's usually just me sending a happy birthday text, getting a THX back 3 days later, or my mom sending a mass text reminding everyone to buy Vanessa a gift. But suddenly, there was a radical paradigm shift. The sudden deluge of messages was dizzying. My mom, who usually can't remember what city I live in, texted, "Honey, we are so incredibly proud of you. I always knew your hard work would pay off. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Let's do lunch this week, just us two. I want to hear all about your amazing life." Then came Vanessa. Her text completely bypassed the shock and went straight to the entitlement. "Hey, we really need to talk. Greg and I are under a lot of stress with the new house and the interest rates. You know family is supposed to look out for each other, right? Call me as soon as you get this." I didn't reply to any of them. I just went home, poured a glass of bourbon, and slept better than I had in a decade. The next morning, the real ambush started. My dad called me. He didn't mention the gravy boat incident. Instead, he used a booming, jovial, proud father tone I had literally never heard him use with me before. He insisted on taking me out to the highest-end steakhouse in the city on Saturday night to properly celebrate my monumental success. I knew exactly what he was doing, but honestly, I was curious. I wanted to see just how far they would go. So I agreed. When I walked into the restaurant, the vibe was sickeningly sweet. It was almost surreal. My parents, who routinely forgot my birthday and ignored my college graduation, were suddenly treating me like royalty. They stood up to hug me. My dad kept clapping me on the back. Throughout the appetizers, they asked incredibly detailed, deeply invested questions about my tech career. "Tell us more about this AI infrastructure, OP. It sounds fascinating," my dad boomed. Every time I made a mild, dry joke, they laughed way too loudly, drawing looks from other tables. Then came the ordering. My dad didn't even look at the prices. He pointed to the wine list and ordered a vintage that cost $450 a bottle, flashing me a conspiratorial wink. They ordered the Wagyu, the seafood towers, the works. I just sat back, chewed my steak, and watched the performance. The moment the dessert menus arrived, the masks finally began to slip, and the real motive crawled out. My dad cleared his throat, leaned across the table, and lowered his voice into what he clearly thought was a serious, business-to-business tone. "So, OP," he started, swirling his expensive wine. "Vanessa and Greg have this incredible tech startup idea. Greg has been doing some consulting, and they just need a small, friendly seed investment to get it off the ground. Say, $2 million. It's couch cushion money for you, but it would change their lives." Before I could even process the absurdity of Greg running a tech startup, my dad kept going, dropping his voice even lower. "And, you know, my own retirement portfolio took a massive hit during the market dip last year. Your mother and I are getting older. We were wondering if you could look over our mortgage and maybe clean that up for us?" To keep things simple, I took a slow bite of my cheesecake, patted my mouth with a napkin, and calmly looked my father in the eye. "No," I said. My dad blinked, his smile faltering. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I replied smoothly. "I pay a very strict wealth management firm to handle every single dollar of my money. Their absolute, non-negotiable policy is no family loans, no family bailouts, and zero unvetted startup investments. It's out of my hands. Sorry." The flip was instantaneous. The sweet, doting facade they had maintained for 2 hours completely crumbled, exposing the raw, ugly greed underneath. My dad's face turned a violent shade of purple. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the crystal wine glasses rattle. "Are you kidding me?" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You arrogant, selfish, ungrateful little brat. We sacrificed everything for you. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. And this is how you repay your family? By hoarding your wealth while your own sister struggles." It was a total, unadulterated lie. They hadn't sacrificed a thing for me. They had poured every resource, dollar, and ounce of affection into Vanessa while I raised myself on academic scholarships. I didn't yell. I just stood up, threw $100 bill onto the table to cover my portion of the food, and walked out of the restaurant while my dad was still red-faced and panting. The moment I got into my car, my phone lit up with a FaceTime call from Vanessa. I answered it, and she was in the middle of a full-blown hysterics tantrum. She was crying so hard, she was practically hyperventilating, screaming into the camera. "You are ruining my life. Opie," she shrieked. "You're doing this on purpose. I already told Greg we could afford our lifestyle upgrade because we had your money coming. I told our contractor we could do the luxury renovations. You lied to us by omission for years just to make us look foolish. You're a monster." She actually blamed me for her spending money I hadn't even given her. I hung up on her mid-sentence. By Sunday morning, the flying monkeys had been released. I started getting bombarded with text messages from extended relatives, aunts, uncles, and random cousins I hadn't seen or spoken to in over a decade. They were all chiming in, shaming me for being heartless, telling me that blood is thicker than water, and lecturing me about how disgusting it is to hoard wealth while my sister's family faces financial strain. It was a coordinated smear campaign, clearly orchestrated by my mother and Vanessa. But if they thought guilt-tripping me was going to work, they severely underestimated how numb I've become to their opinions over the last 28 years. I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I sat on my couch, took a sip of my coffee, and systematically blocked every single one of them, one by one. But things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. I'll post the final update soon. Final update. It's been a few weeks since my last post, and things have finally settled down enough for me to give you guys the final update. To be honest, I had to involve my legal and wealth management security teams because my family completely lost their minds. About a week after the steakhouse disaster, I woke up to a frantic call from the front desk of my condo complex. My dad and Greg had shown up unannounced. They were aggressively arguing with the security guard, demanding to be led up to my unit so they could force me to talk sense. Security threatened to call the police, and they finally peeled out of the parking lot. But that was the absolute last straw for me. I didn't play games. The very next morning, I had my attorney draft and formally serve a cease and desist letter to my parents and Vanessa. The letter was cold, clinical, and terrifyingly clear. It outlined every instance of harassment, the unannounced ambush at my building, and explicitly stated that any further contact, whether by phone, email, third-party relatives, or showing up in person, would immediately result in us filing for permanent restraining orders and pursuing harassment charges to the fullest extent of the law. That was the ultimate consequence they needed. When you have $160 million, your legal team doesn't just send angry letters. They carry massive, undeniable weight. The moment they realized I was completely serious, fully protected, and willing to drag them into a courtroom, the silence was deafening. The call stopped. The flying monkeys vanished. They finally realized the gravy train was never leaving the station. Now for the part one know you all want to hear, the satisfying update on the golden child's downfall. Without my forced bailout, Vanessa and Greg's house of cards completely collapsed. It turns out they had stretched themselves so thin to buy that $1.2 million mansion that they couldn't even afford the basic property taxes and the ballooning interest rates without outside help. Because I refused to play their savior, they were forced to put the overpriced house back on the market just months after buying it. And because the market shifted, they had to take a massive financial loss. According to a mutual family friend, their marriage is under immense strain. Turns out, when you build a relationship entirely on status, greed, and flexing on others, a financial crisis tends to break you. My mom actually tried to send one final, pathetic email to my work address to bypass the blocks. It was filled with manipulative sob stories, claiming that she misses the old days and wishes that money hadn't ruined our beautiful family. I almost laughed out loud reading it. The sheer irony is staggering. Money didn't ruin this family. My money didn't change a single thing about who I am. What ruined our family was their own bottomless greed and the decades of emotional neglect they inflicted on me. They only care now because my net worth has 9 digits. As for my new life, I am doing incredible. I finally closed on a gorgeous, sprawling estate in a completely different part of the country where the weather is beautiful and nobody knows my name. I'm focusing entirely on my peace of mind. I also worked with my financial team to quietly donate a significant, life-changing portion of my wealth to a local youth charity that helps kids from broken or neglectful homes get college scholarships, something close to my heart. I spent the winter holidays surrounded by my chosen family. I flew out a group of my closest, most genuine friends, the guys who knew me back when I was broke, eating ramen in a cramped college dorm, and pulling all-nighters coding for a startup that felt like a pipe dream. They didn't care about the $160 million. They just cared that their friend was happy and safe. For the first time in my life, I felt completely seen. I want to thank the Reddit community for being the exact sounding board I needed to finally cut those toxic ties and realize I wasn't the bad guy here. Living well is the best revenge. Thanks for reading, everyone. Hope you out.